I was visiting my daughter and grandkids, 10 male, 9 male, 3 female the other day. They had just got back from a vacation and the kids had gifts for me, so I went to see what they got me. As we sat around chatting, my daughter told me a story of her encounter with an entitled person. She's a very non-confrontational person, but is a true mama bear when it comes to her kids. Grandkid 3 has long blonde spiral curls that are natural and gorgeous. A little biased from grandfather. Her hair almost glows a golden color in the sunlight, and she has a big smile most of the time. She also talks a mile a minute in a tiny squeaky voice and is not a shy kid at all. Her story, to the best of my memory. First and second grandchildren were looking at some games while my daughter and the third kid were checking out toys. All of a sudden, G3 screamed and fell on her bum in the middle of the aisle, being yanked out of my daughter's hand. My daughter spun around to see what happened and saw the EM with a handful of my granddaughter's hair and my granddaughter crying in pain and fear. My daughter turned into a raging mama and slapped the EM's hand hard enough to dislodge it from the hair and also hurt for a long time. EM, what do you think you are doing? I was just looking at her hair. It's beautiful. D, what makes you think it is a smart thing to pull a baby's hair and knock her to the floor then molest her? Making her cry, and how is it a good idea? You're lucky if I don't call the police right now. DM, I never did any of that. You're lying to try to get me in trouble. I'm going to call the police and tell them you are harassing me. D, please do. Off-duty cup to my daughter. Ma'am, I saw everything. I was behind EM and saw her grab your daughter's hair and yank it. I am off duty, but I can call it in if you want to press charges. D, yes, please. During this exchange, the EM was trying to play the victim card, but my daughter said there were others who saw as well and were telling EM off. My daughter had picked up my granddaughter and was comforting her during the altercation, and by the end of things, she had calmed down enough not to cry. The cop told EM he would be calling the police and have her charged with assault because he is the witness to the crime. My grandsons, being older brothers, had taught my granddaughter a few bad things. Some were pranks and others were not so nice. She looked at the woman and flipped her the bird. My younger grandson laughed and said, I taught her that. My daughter wasn't even mad at that time. She saw it fit in the moment. Why is it when someone sees someone with beautiful hair, pregnant woman, etc. in public, they think they have the right to touch that person? It is called personal space for a reason. Okay, so a while ago, the resident doctor at Mr. Tattoo's tattoo plant resigned to go for greener pastures, which is a shame because he was the nicest guy. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Tattoo's medical wing sent us a replacement doctor, and I almost instantly didn't like the guy, who we will call Dr. McCose. I like to think I have a pretty sharp intuition, but I don't really let it drive my behavior in front of people I just met. But holy hell, did he ever work to deserve it? During the course of his first couple months at the plant, Dr. Mekos lost the documentation for my contractors several times, then denied them entry because they had no documentation. This caused several vital repairs to our network infrastructure to go behind schedule, and Francis, the plant director, to get on my back about it. It was especially demanding of my time, most of the time for petty things I can't control or address. Didn't even get a ticket or anything. He would just call me over to look at his computer, demanding I fix it. Not his work computer, his personal computer. Also somehow made enemies of most of the departments. This will come into play later. Then the incident. Due to electrical equipment failure for quite some time, all the network and infrastructure had to be powered with a diesel engine. I don't really want to go into the specifics because it will fill this story with clutter, but either gas goes in or the plant stops and Mr. Tattoo loses a ton of money. So my contractors came in to fill the critically empty engine. At this time, we were about an hour away from a dry engine and doom. Francis, the plant director, personally approves and escalates the entrance of my people as an emergency. Then Dr. Meko stops the whole thing, citing a health risk. My people can't work, and the power plot will stop. Eventually, me, Francis, and the maintenance department got around it by asking maintenance to pump the gas themselves. But this move earned him the ire of Francis and got the doc into my blacklist. But that wasn't the thing that earned him my grudge. One day, Priscilla asks for my help. She's the head of her own department, a very nice older lady who knows not a thing about computers and is constantly asking me for help. Because she warrants about half of my support tickets a year, you can say she's my primary source of income. Well, I'm working on her email because it won't load. Then Dr. Makos comes in asking for whatever. And let me tell you, he was not just rude. He was dismissive, calling her worthless. When I ask her about it after the guy left, she tells me he's like this every time. This is the moment that gave me causus belli. I started collecting information, discovered some very interesting tidbits, and waited for my time. This will come into play later. One day, Dr. Makos calls me into his office. He demands that I give him access to the open net because at the moment, he can't browse freely. This was my time. Well, I can't really do that. You have to create a support ticket and a request. This could take weeks or a month. Technically true, it took a couple of days most of the time. It will also have a cost for your area. This was also true. It would cost about $1 a month. He stood there for a couple seconds thinking, but you have internet access on your desk. You can browse anything, right? Give me access. And there it was. I can do that, but you have to keep it confidential because it's outside of the corporate network. There's no surveillance. Do it, and I did. Usually, in a corporate setting, employees have access to the heavily monitored and restricted corporate network. Mr. Tato's network has a team of people that block all the fun stuff and watch your every move. The network he asked me to route to his office is basically what you would find in a home. I mostly use it for things that need access to an outside network, and it only has my eyes on it. Yes, this was a trap. The moment I finished routing the cable to the doc's office, I set up a small backup laptop with surveillance software and started the capture. Called the doctor, told him his private internet is installed, and I reiterated how he should consider this an olive branch and he should tell nobody about it. Now, a couple of very interesting tidbits of information. Surveillance software is so cool. Basically, it sees and logs traffic on your network. You see what every computer or device is doing on your network, what sites you are browsing, and at what times. During the course of my investigation, I learned that Dr. Makos was a serious creep. He earned infamy with his female staff with lewd and uncomfortable comments. Several female workers also complained, but due to the way HR works Pete, the head of HR couldn't do anything about it without hard evidence. But I knew what the capture would find, and the doc delivered fast. After a whole day of data capture, I showed the logs to Pete, and I was honestly almost impressed. Several different inappropriate sites at 10 a.m. Traffic to these various sites for about an hour. We asked the staff at the medical office, and at this time, he was shut into his office. Another visit, different site this time, at 1 p.m. lunchtime. Guess he was having a cheeseburger. And a third one at 5 p.m., 1 hour away from closing time. Dude watched inappropriate videos at work on his work computer 3 times in one day. It was kind of hard to explain to Pete how data capture works, but that was it. Hard evidence. I apologized to Pete for giving him extra work, but he dismissed it, saying he was happy to have cause. Called the head of medical nationwide immediately. Dr. Makos was escorted out by security the next day, and I showered his work laptop in alcohol before starting work on it the next day, and my days improved. I used to work as a merchandiser for a national soda company about 10 years ago. One of the biggest problems we had would occur every holiday when stores had serious sales on soda, like getting 4 12-packs for $10. The problem is that there simply isn't enough room in the back room to store enough product on a really busy holiday like the 4th of July. Our sales reps would order way more stuff than we ever had room for, and then it was up to me on how to Tetris it all into the space for us in the back. The way it should be done is to send multiple orders on days like that as space becomes available. But of course that means sending drivers to stores multiple times, which costs time and gas. I had one store that had a really strict backroom manager with a no-exceptions policy of pallets never being stacked more than 3 high. On this particular 4th of July, we literally had twice as much product than what would fit. So I call my boss and tell him he needs to send a driver to buy back some of the excess load. He tells me to stack the pallets as high as the forklift will allow me to solve the problem. I remind him at this location I'm only allowed to stack 3 high. He tells me to figure it out. QMC. I know that the backroom manager will get lava-level mad when he sees this, but it's the boss's orders, so I'm up to 5 high when the manager sees it and goes banshee ape crap on me. I tell him it's my boss's orders. I finish stacking with one tower now being 5 high, then start walking out as my shift is now done. The backroom manager tells me if I leave it like that, we can kiss our account with the store goodbye, and I leave. I get a call from my boss 30 minutes later that there's a driver on the way to do buyback and I need to go back to that store ASAP. I tell him my shift is done for the day and I've already returned the company truck and am on my way home to see some fireworks. It's 8 p.m. at this point. He tells me to turn around and go get it sorted. I tell him the only way I'm going back is if I get double time for the entire day, about 14 hours at that point, plus a 10% raise. He yells at me that it's never going to happen, so I tell him that me returning the store is never going to happen. I also tell him that if he changes his mind, he can send an email to me agreeing in writing to my terms. I had other side gigs at the time and wasn't concerned at all about this job. I got an email 30 minutes later from my boss's boss agreeing to those terms. It is immediately followed by a phone call from him apologizing that I'm needed and I need to go back to the store ASAP. My boss's boss also sent my boss, who was already at home, to help sort the mess out. Hearing him apologize to the backroom manager was gold. This is a retro one from the late 90s in the days of prevalent line telephones. I, 19 male, was home with my parents over Christmas break from college. My girlfriend, 18 female, was a freshman and I was a sophomore. My home was a 3-hour drive from our college. Our school conducted sorority rush for freshman women who chose to participate at the end of Christmas break, so she had gone back a few days early to go through the process. My girlfriend and her friend group all targeted a single sorority where they wanted to land and decided to pursue that when the time came. It was, to my immature 19-year-old mind, the best sorority. I had already gone into a fraternity a year earlier when I was a freshman. As was the case in those days, she called every night during process to tell me how it had gone. I knew she would definitely call on the 4th night because that is when they found out which sororities gave them bids and then they had to choose. So she calls the house line and my EM picks up. My EM was unaware my GF was going through a rush. I wasn't trying to hide it, but it's just not something we had discussed as mother and son for whatever reason. Anyhow, when my EM picks up, my GF is clearly distraught and crying. EM yells up for me to pick up the landline phone in my room, and I do. GF did not get into her preferred sorority. She received bids to all of the other good ones. I know this seems stupid, vapid, and privileged as an adult, but to an 18-year-old, this can seem like a terrible event. She was sobbing and looking for comfort. As we're talking, my EM comes rushing into my room, screaming she's crying. Is she pregnant? EM then proceeds to kick me and tell me I've ruined her reputation and the family's reputation. So I have a sobbing GF on the phone and an EM who is absolutely losing her mind, trying to literally beat me up. I hung up the phone, told EM to get out and that it was nothing as substantial as an unplanned pregnancy and to get the F out of my room, which she did in embarrassment. I then called GF back, consoled her, helped her plan which sorority she wanted, and turned my attention back to EM. EM was supremely embarrassed but defensive, saying she was just concerned about me. I told her not to jump to conclusions in the future, but she was exceptionally defensive of her stupid actions. This was my first lesson that EM was not meant to be a parent to adult children and ultimately led to me going low contact with her a few years later. I worked in an IT support capacity as a contractor. A year here, a few weeks there, always for an agency, never for the company. Some years I would have 5 employers. It worked out great for me. In December 2016, I was hired by an online pharmacy on a 1-year contract. You get ARX from your doctor, log into their portal, send in an image of your RX, and it gets mailed to you in a few days, cheaper than your local pharmacy. The agency that sent me there told me that the employer preferred I work as a contractor for the company and not the agency. Again, fine by me, as long as I get a paycheck, right? 2 weeks after I started, my hiring manager, the chief security officer, told me that there was an oversight and a comprehensive background check needed to be done. This was a police record check, a high-level RCMP check, plus exhaustive employment verification. In the past, I had listed the companies I worked for, not the agencies. Past employers were okay with that as they understood the world of contractors, not this dude. So the employment background check comes back and none of the companies could verify I worked for them as I didn't exist in their books, having worked for the agencies that sent me there. Also, the employment verification company was based out of the U.S. and not Canada where I live and work. Anyway, the CSO chews me out for lying and threatens to fire me on the spot. I pull up all my T4, income tax, slips I had on Google Drive, pay stubs, timesheets, images of my ID cards, employment offer letters, and more to prove I did work at those companies. But for agencies, this was clearly totally unfamiliar to him. To save face, he threatened me that I needed to go by the book in every detail or I'd be out on my butt before I could blink. Since this was a pharmacy, and if you're in Canada, you would totally understand Pipeta. Most pharmacies use ARX filling tool called Kroll. I had total access to the training portal of Kroll. This meant they ran an algorithm that scrambled real customers' details, real first and last names, street numbers and names, towns and cities, birth dates, phone numbers, doctor names, and RX databases would get scrambled and reissued. So if I opened a random customer, every detail above would be pulled from millions of customers in a never-to-repeat random order, 100 and foolproof to isolate any specific patient customer, except for the actual scanned prescriptions. As an example, making this up for clarity, if I clicked on the View RX field for Mrs. Mary Wilson of 274, Dunhill Avenue, Grumble, Alberta, Q9F3R 8519 754 8465. The title, first name, last name, street number, street name, street type, town, province, postal code, phone number, all would be pulled randomly from the database. But there was an actual scanned RX for a real person. Say in Ontario, with their name and address and phone and doctor and the ERX details. Holy crap, I'm not supposed to see this. The pharmacists and pharmacy techs who filled the risks could see patient details like any pharmacy, but not me or others. I am not cleared for it. By the book, I immediately went to see the CTO and showed him what I had seen. He went pale. Who else have you shown this to? Well, no one. But anyone who has access to the training portal could see it if they burrowed down deep enough. He thanked me and said he would look after it. By the time I got back to my desk, the training portal had been shut down. The CSEO was fired the next day. By the book.